Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you all are. Welcome to Healthcare Simulation Week 2022. My name is Helen Hanson. I'm the marketing manager for Inovus Medical, and we're a healthcare simulation manufacturer based in the UK. So it's great to have you all with us this morning. And I'm going to introduce the presenter today, who is Dr. David Rawaf, who's a colleague of mine, but also has a long bio that I'm literally going to read through now, because there's no way on God's earth I'd be able to remember all of this. So David is an MBBS MD Merit, BSc Honours, MSc Graduate and Anatomy Demonstrator from St George Hospital Medical School, University of London. Currently, whilst working as a trauma and orthopaedics elective registrar, and previously as an orthopaedic core trainee and A&E clinical and education fellow at University College London Hospital, Kingston Hospital and Epsom and St Helier Hospitals, with clerkships at Johns Hopkins Hospital, Baltimore and Chino Valley and Montclair Medical Centers, Los Angeles. David is also heavily involved in medical device and software consulting, including validation, accreditation, and approval through bodies such as the FDA. And in addition to his clinical role, David is the clinical excellence lead for Inovus Medical.
Thank you, Helen.
That's okay. Now we are going to run a presentation that David has pre-recorded. And once the presentation is over, if any of you would like to ask some questions, then please pop them into your chat. And whilst you're doing that, it would be lovely to hear exactly where you're all from, wherever you are in the world, so that we can sort of gauge the audience and say hello to you in your own time zones. So that would be really helpful. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Dr. David Rawaf. Today I will be talking to you about the use of augmented reality simulators in laparoscopic surgical training. This is actually on the back end of a master's project that was led by Courtney Ludig, based at University of Nottingham-Trent. And we have presented this alongside the Society of Surgical Simulation, as well as it being overarched and looked after by Inovus Medical, which is a surgical simulation company where we're hoping to become the world's partner for connected surgical training. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to the overview picture, which is that there are over 20,000 preventable deaths in the USA, 25% of hospitalizations due to medical errors, 10% of those in the UK are a result of adverse effects, and a lot of these are because of mistakes during surgery. There are lots of surgical errors occurring throughout the world in surgery. As a result of this, these can be deemed to be a result of inadequate training and education. So the project aim was actually to determine the suitability of AR or augmented reality for laparoscopic surgical training through a review of literature in the form of a systematic review. And really, it's a good time to really focus on why lap surgery in particular. We have severe and minor complications that can be avoided if we're trained properly. There is a massive learning curve. It's generally a see one, do one on the patient's bedside. As a result, it takes quite a long time, alongside the working restrictions we have. It takes quite a long time to train up to a proficient level, and even once we are there, it is difficult to maintain that level. We have a number of method of skills assessments currently in place, but these are inadequate, as you'll see. So there are lots of modalities in training. You have your classic animal or cadaver models. You've got simple box trainers, VR simulators, and AR simulators. And as you can see here, there's lots of benefits to the AR simulators. There's lots of tactile haptic feedback, and you compare that to VR simulators where there are no haptics, and you compare that to animal models where there's lots of cultural and anatomical and ethical issues. And there's also some simplicity or some low fidelity aspects of box trainers that means it doesn't quite meet the expectations of the training. Anyway, here's our methodology. We've actually defined 26 articles through exclusion and inclusion criteria. And we found lots of results. We're looking at simulators in the market, validity of the simulators, the AR versus other modalities, AR versus other modalities, and user preference, as well as skill acquisition, and single or multimodal training for lap training. So we found a lot of different types of simulators. As you can see, the Inovus one that we create is on the right there, which is basically a hub and spoke model. We can take this home if we wanted to and train on the same device. And there are lots of other funky, interesting looking box trainers, as you can see in the pictures there. But really, once we actually took a step back and looked at the fidelity, as well as the types of validity, we can see that actually construct and concurrent validity on using objective measuring, using replication of the performance within, within essentially our objective metrics to achieve a gold standard. That means we're looking at high fidelity trainers here. There are low fidelity trainers where we're looking at face validity or content validity, but these are very subjective. We also looked at skill acquisition. We can see there's an increased speed of learning, increased success rate, reduced operative time, improved ability to actually complete on non-technical as well as technical skills. And also we're seeing that some actual similarity between cadaveric and simulated groups as well. And we can actually see that the augmented reality simulators do mimic the same difficulties as what a cadaver would give you. And the overall operative time is reduced. So we're seeing here that actually there is a user preference. Between the four, augmented reality simulators are actually preferred. And we're actually seeing that trainees prefer multimodality training because it reduces boredom and improves training outcomes. So sticking to one form of training is not as useful as utilizing all of them. So really, looking at the critical analysis of AI and laparoscopic surgical training, the difficulty is that we haven't assessed skill transferability. There's lots of procedures that it does not cover. There is also some good things coming out of that, which is that it's cheaper, but there's lots of reduction surgical errors. There are good educational contents, and there are lots of assessment of performance like objectivity and the metrics involved. And it's generally very easy to use. It's preferred as a result of that. And looking ahead, we need to look at other aspects of the study, which is when to incorporate these simulators, what stage of training, the mental workload associated with that. So I know at Inovus we're in the process of creating an EEG cap, which can be worn, and we can monitor the brain waves of the trainee as they operate. And what we find is that the more junior you are, the more frontal you are. We can see through eye tracking that your eyes are darting all over the place. The more senior you are, your eyes are very steady, looking at the lap screen, and you're more limbic, ironically enough. We're also looking at physical workload as well. So things like harnesses that allow you to measure joint position space means that we can assess what musculoskeletal disorders a surgeon might gain from operating in certain positions for a long period of time. And obviously looking at the skill transferability, what other simulators there are in the market, as well as other laparoscopic procedures from all sorts of specialties. There are lots of technical improvements that are in process and need to be done, so better replication of the clinical environment. So, for example, at Inovus, we actually use a human tissue likeness factor scale. Cost reduction, so making things cheaper increases its affordability, increases its accessibility as a result, without sacrificing on functionality. So that's those are our core values at Inovus. And also, we actually want to look at quantitative scoring as well as standardization of these metrics, and thinking about actually aiming to have this user-centered. There are limitations to our study, so we have some omission of results due to poor search terms. We also have a bias towards a pro-MIS simulator because there's lots of publications on that. But in reality, the conclusions are is that cadavers are still the gold standard, but augmented reality is preferred. And with further investigation and technological improvement, which we are working very hard at Inovus Medical to make leaps and bounds in this, is that these simulators, augmented reality solutions, have the potential to become the new gold standard. And I think at that point, it'd be good to include some slides on what the problem is, which is that, again, to summarize, the issue is that we are seeing one and doing one on the patient's bedside. We are practicing on the patient. And all the other VR simulators, even cadavers, are really expensive. And as a result, they tend to be locked away in places we can't get to. And they are poor in functionality. VR simulators don't have haptics. Cadavers tend to be, doused in so much formaldehyde that the tissues do not feel like normal tissues anymore. They're very friable, and sometimes very rubbery. And there's also no integration between simulated and live training. And actually, I wanted to show you this slide because it gives you a lay of the land. And I know this is a biased slide because I work for Inovus, but Inovus sit right in the middle of what we call surgical training, which we believe is nothing like surgical training. In reality, we shouldn't be going to practice and doing the real operation. We should be practicing like it's a sport. Say tennis, for example, where we practice our forehands, backhands, and serves separately before we bring it all together as an entire game. And so that's what we're trying to do here, is actually provide the high and medium low fidelity training, live training, post-event training, as well as preclinical simulated training, and then dialing that all into one cloud-based piece of software, which allows us to really track the surgeons' progress as they go through their careers. And here's a very nice video just displaying what an augmented reality simulator looks like. You can see here there are real instruments, so device agnostic, and there's a real human tissue likeness factor calculated piece of silicon blend appendix in there, which we're currently dissecting. And because of the computer vision, machine learning algorithms and sensors we have within the appendix, say if we cut in the wrong place at the wrong time, or we're a little bit too rough with the tissues, we may end up with a complication, such as a bleed, as you can see here. And really what we're testing here is not only your ability to respond as a surgeon to a complication, but also we're testing what decisions you would make. So here we're simulating the blood, we're simulating the smoke, we're simulating the cognitive step of applying diaphragm, and supplying an energy device with all of these boxes would be prohibitively expensive. So we've gone for the cost-effective solution of applying this iris around the screen, so you can select tools like diaphragm. And you can see the augmented reality overlays from the reflective cecum and the rest of the bowel. You can see the reflections from the peritoneum there. And just to reiterate, this is what it looks like within our simulator, which is what we believe to be the cutting edge of augmented reality surgical training. And on that,
Right, looks like the presentation is completed. If anybody would like to ask any chat questions, then please just pop them into the chat. I have a list of some questions here that some people have already sent through before today, so to actually add to the presentation. So one of the questions I'd like to pose to David this morning is, how do you actually manage your sort of mental and physical workload and manage to fit in the training that's required to keep at the top of your game?
It's an interesting question. So I'm assuming that's from a surgeon's perspective, which
Yes.
which essentially is the end user that we're trying to help with this technology, all of us in the field. So I think obviously there is an element of being self-aware as a surgeon. There's plenty of non-technical skills that we're trained on to keep on top of to prevent us from overworking ourselves. However, resilience is also trained. Saying that, there is technology that can help the surgeon, and I'm hopefully you guys would have heard in the presentation when I touched on this, but we are looking at two types of essentially sensors. One being a sensor for mental workload, which is in the form of an EEG cap, and the other one is a joint position sense harness, which you wear whilst you operate. Now, the harness was actually originally designed for bariatric surgery, and particularly for the types of bariatric laparoscopic surgery where you would be operating at the side, say at 90 degrees, whilst facing forwards at a laparoscopic screen. And we're seeing with those particular surgeries, with the high BMI on top, is that the surgeons are actually putting undue stress on their joints, which we've now been able to measure utilizing this harness. This harness is actually born out of a project from University of Leicester and Loughborough by Max Zecker and Esther Moss, Professor Esther Moss, and we're currently in the process trying to finalize that product into a final tangible thing that people can buy and utilize not only in surgery, in simulation, but also in real-time simulation or real surgery as well. And the same goes for the EEG cap, which is coming out of a project from Nottingham Trent University, which is also quite interesting because we can actually monitor the brain function whilst we're operating. And we're seeing there is a stark difference between juniors and seniors in terms of brain monitoring. We're also looking to look at eye fatigue and eye tracking. And certainly the juniors in laparoscopic surgery, we're seeing that there's lots of darting down and up with the eyes when they're looking down at their hands when they're operating, or they're looking at their instruments or looking at where their instrument is going. But certainly with experience, we can see that surgeons tend to look straight at the screen and they don't look away from it, even when they're swapping instruments or perhaps even putting other devices into the laparoscopic field, because obviously you have a surgical assistant to help you with those things. So lots of exciting things coming out in the technological advancements that we have made, and the future is looking very bright for that. So thank you for that question.
Okay. Well, one thing I'd like to say, quite a lot of females will probably be of my sort of stature, where we're quite short. So being able to manage the sort of physicality and keep your posture correct, yeah, sounds great for that
Helen, you're absolutely right. It's not just the height as well. The size of the hands has been a problem for some female surgeons, where actually the laparoscopic instruments are too large for the hands. And we have actually made some, using our 3D printer back at HQ, we've created some adapters for our basic tools, but every tool will need its own adapter, I imagine, that will allow surgeons with smaller hands to still function and operate and not have fatigue in their hands or develop RSI, repetitive strain injuries. So lots of exciting things, and I completely agree, Helen. We've got to look after the surgeon. The longevity of the surgeon means that we can get more operations out of them. And that means they'll have a longer and healthier career. And if we look after our workforce, then we'll have a better health system.
So one other question I've got here is what makes for a sort of a true immersive surgical simulation experience, in your opinion?
That's a good question. Thank you, Helen. In my honest opinion, and I did repeat myself on this in the presentation, hopefully if you guys heard, was really aiming and hammering home haptics. As a surgeon, having that haptic feedback is so important to be able to actually have a good outcome for the patient, especially when suturing. Say we're doing a vaginal cuff closure in the simulated world. Having haptics is really, really key. Also, having a real tissue model, I think, is also quite key. Reason being, I've operated on quite a lot of VR systems where the tissues are programmed, obviously, but the only problem that we tend to have with those simulators is the polygons or the graphics actually tend to blend when you start to introduce a needle into the graphics engines. And we're now relying on an engine to provide the visual feedback as well as actually the haptic feedback through a series of motors. So really that combination is not great for lots of fine suturing. I mean, it would be fantastic to say if you're cutting or sawing or drilling in maybe an orthopedics simulation, where some of those haptics and some of those graphics might be a little bit smoother, but for suturing, certainly for micro dissection, for applying rotor knots, those kind of very, very delicate tasks, I do strongly recommend sticking to trying to operate on real things and getting real feedback through real instruments. And that's the mentality that we've gone for at Inovus, obviously. And now, we're in a world where there's so much available in terms of simulation. I think we can afford to be picky with how we want our simulation to be. Now, that's not to say that there isn't a place for virtual reality or more immersive and low feedback, visual and haptic feedback simulators. Certainly there will be, especially in I would say, for example, an ATLS trauma setting. If you're trying to simulate that, you need the immersive experience. You need the situational awareness that you need to learn for those situations. And certainly there are moments, say, for OR training where we're looking at patient prep, port positioning, where the patient would be in the operating room, so the feng shui of the operating theatre, as well as even thinking about what things we would have to do, like the WHO checklist and whatnot. And certainly an immersive experience for those things would be fantastic. So really, it's this is summarizing the presentation. The systematic review is that just sticking to one modality is useful, but it's not as useful and preferred as sticking to multimodality training. So utilizing the two each for their own expertise and their own specialities, would be fantastic for the trainee. I see a question actually on the chat.
Yes, this one there. Yeah. Would you like me to read the question out, or?
Yeah, why not, Helen? Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, you touched on joint fatigue, for example, but are there any other surprising trends emerging from using AR that could possibly affect the full healthcare industry that you're seeing?
It's a very interesting question. So surprising trends from using augmented reality that can possibly affect the full healthcare industry that you're seeing. So I think certainly, I think that there is more than surgery that can be simulated with augmented reality. Certainly, there's a lot of hands-on procedures that we wouldn't consider being surgical, that can help other fields within healthcare, certainly. And there are, we've actually touched on this in the past before we went into surgical simulation with a rapid sequence induction trainer for anesthetics. You know, there's certainly lots of other markets that we've looked at. So aesthetics, we've looked at anesthetics, so applying lines and things like that. There is so much that we can simulate using augmented reality, but certainly what we've seen the low-hanging fruit or the high return of investment on is simulating procedures that require a huge amount of haptics. So even, for example, when we're simulating a cholecystectomy, we don't actually simulate the entire cholecystectomy skin to skin, because a lot of that is stuff we can learn cognitively. We only actually dial in and focus on the crucial aspect, which is the Callot's triangle dissection in the case of the cholecystectomy. So I think it's an interesting question that is being posed there, and certainly, you know, if we take a step back from actually simulating and training surgeons, the beauty of augmented reality is that you can put any instrument into a simulator. And what we're now finding, the benefits of that approach is from a medical device validation perspective, is that we are able to place, say, a brand new type of needle holder into the simulator, and we can test that needle holder, the new version, against the original version. And we can see whether that new device makes you operate faster, whether you have a better economy of movement, whether your other metrics like acceleration and smoothness are better. And that can go to quite an extreme extent, to the point where we can even validate that device with whoever we need to. And what we're seeing is that actually those devices that are being tested and validated within the simulators are then going on to create huge waves in the healthcare industry. So certainly that's another way of looking at things. I wonder, Helen, if you've got anything to add on that.
No, I was just going to say that for me, one of the key things for all simulation training and the benefits of it is patient outcomes at the end of the day. We are helping to encourage surgeons to become, like I said before, top of their game, make sure they are performing to their best standard, because at the end of the day, it will affect the patient's outcome and the success of the operation that they're actually performing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, you know, we've recently done some health economic studies, you know, just for our simulators, but also for simulation in general. And what we're finding is that, you know, even a reduction of 10% in operative efficiency, so that's completion time, we're seeing in British pounds, we can save up to £79 per patient for just one operation. And you extrapolate that across, firstly, some simulators are improving you up to 60% on operative efficiency. So we can literally times that number by 6. But also we're seeing similar trends where even more money is saved in other operations. So it's really quite exciting to be able to prove that, to be able to validate that, and have that peer reviewed. And certainly the knock-on effects of that are not just monetary, but also, you know, if you're quicker at operating, you'll be able to put more people on the list, which is great, but also you'll have a much shorter skin to skin time. So less anesthetic in the patient's bloodstream, which means they can get up and go home much earlier. So lots of benefits, as well as, you know, even reducing the complication rate through saving on economy of movement is also a great thing. Yeah, I hope that answers the question.
I think the other thing for me is that as we're finding sort of the different technologies that are becoming available, it's opening up other areas for people to actually practice at home throughout their sort of maternity leave. If they previously were, when they were shielding with COVID, it's just opening up doors for everybody. And I think it's wonderful to see the advancements in technology being brought forward.
Absolutely, Helen. You just reminded me of a really key point there, is that the surgeons across the world are still human beings. They have lives. They can get unwell, and they do take time off. And you're absolutely right. Being able to train at home or train around the surgeon's time means that you'll have much more engagement in that training, and that's so crucial for the future of maintaining a healthy and efficient and proficient workforce.
So I'm not too sure if anybody else has got any questions, or if David would like to finish off with anything today.
Thanks, Helen. No, I don't think there's anything more from me, but it was really great, and to be part of this. Thank you for the opportunity, everyone, and thank you for joining the session, whether it be live or a bit later on.
And I'd like to say thank you for joining us from a whole host of different countries. And I've literally written a short list here: New Zealand, Malaysia, Ethiopia, Qatar, Egypt, Turkey, Kenya. It's mind-blowing to think that we're sat on a computer touching everybody in different parts of the world. It's great to be part of Healthcare Simulation Week in this way.
Yeah, thanks everyone. That's really cool. Thanks for dialing in.
So if there's no more questions, thank you very much, everybody, for taking part today.